Facebook page. Welcome on this wonderful Monday morning, the 26th of April. For some of you, it is a long weekend, but for some of us, we don't know such a thing as a long weekend. Today, friends, we are talking about the Kairos document with our dashing guest. But before I introduce our guest, may I please ask that, as it is per the norm, call your friends, call your church people, call your church leaders who you don't think may not have connected, so that they may connect and ask all the questions and comments that you may want answered. But before we start with our talk, may I please ask that we close our eyes and pray. You are God, wena modimo wa rona. O bile modimo mo malobeng o modimo ka jeno o tla phela o le modimo ka mo sa go tleng. We give all the thanks, the honor and the glory to you, Lord. Thanking you for the gift of life, because many people set their alarms this morning, but they never woke up because we thank you, Lord, for these moments. Lord, moments
Slowly, you're muted.
Thank you so much. So this evening we have Reverend Sidwell Mokhotu, who is an ordained minister in the Methodist Church of Southern Africa. He is the current bishop in the Limpopo Synod. He is an academic. He is I'm tempted to say comrade. You know, he's one of those people who would be in the forefront fighting for people's rights and fighting for justice. I am so honored to be in conversation with you, Moruti Mokhotu. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Slael.
And welcome to everybody. So I am going to give you an opportunity to talk to us about the Kairos document, what it is, what it entails, what a Kairos and what the meaning of Kairos is, so that everybody can understand exactly what you are talking about. And then we can enter into conversation once you're done.
Thank you very much. Thank you that your brief is exactly what I was told. Sometimes you get a brief and when you come to the event, it changes. I was asked to share with people what the Kairos document is historically, where it comes from, what it is about. So basically it's about information sharing in my understanding, but it is also for me an invitation. It is an invitation for us, all of us who are participating and here in the Zoom facility, those who are on Facebook, to be a community of faith in conversation. And because you said, comrade, my comrade, one of their things, it is about how do we conscientize each other. And at the end, I will talk about the need for us to develop what theologians have called the Kairos consciousness. How do we become so that it is not an Old Testament document, but it is brought life in the situation in which we are. And so I have titled it Kairos Document, Revisiting It for Our Times. And by the way, greetings to everybody who's participating. It is an honor and a privilege to be invited to share here something that one participated in, contributed in, and grew around with, which is the Kairos document. The Kairos document, I always pride myself that it is one of the best products of the South African ecumenical prophetic movement. And you can hear the concepts that I'm talking about. Ecumenical prophetic movement that was produced during our struggle for freedom. It was a very powerful document and continues to be even today. It shook the foundations of the apartheid government. It went on and to influence the development of other theological documents here in South Africa and in the world. The power of the document also lied in the collective and consultative process from below. It was not a document that was academic. It was not produced by an individual. And when I was asked, I've also invited some of the people who participated to join us, and I've seen Desmond Lesejane is also here. Its power, as I say, is from the process that produced it. It was workshopped across a diverse section of the people from different parts of our country, those in the rural areas, in the urban cities, students of theology at that time. And so we can confidently call it a people's theology. Seasoned theologians like Albert Nolan and Reverend Dr. Chikane only came in around the editing process, and they gave it a finishing touches. But in its essence, it is the voice of ordinary Christians who made inputs and submissions. And these eminent theologians only packaged it into a readable format. That is very important for us to note. The context of the Kairos document is very important, and as we will hear from the concept of Kairos, the context is important. It was a theological response, really, to the socio-political and material conditions in which South Africa found itself at that time. It was at the height of apartheid repression in the 1980s, because the Kairos document was developed in 1985. The apartheid regime at that time was really running amok, detaining, abducting, and killing people. There was an increase in banning orders. If I'm not mistaken, there were even states of emergency that were declared around that time. A lot of people also went into exile. But it is also at the height of the execution of the struggle and the pushback by anti-apartheid liberation forces. It was at the time that Oliver Tambo, who was in exile and president of the ANC, had called on those of us who were in the country to render South Africa ungovernable. The anti-apartheid forces included all formations of the liberation movement, the mass democratic movement, the Black consciousness movement, and even the Pan-Africanist movement inside the country and outside. And so there was a vibe of democracy, of struggle or execution of the struggle at the time. These anti-apartheid forces included other components of the struggle. The labor movement, NACTU, COSATU, and others were at their prime. There was the civic movement, especially SANCO, the youth structures and student formation, many of which some of us belonged. The anti-apartheid forces also included different sectors. You had the sports, the arts and culture, academia, and the media. The religious and the faith sector was also in the trenches with the people. It was not a bystander looking out there. It was not a theology that was happening from a pie in the sky, as it used to be called. But those of us who were Christians and other faiths were with the people on the ground. The prophetic movement, the response from the religious sector, it is important for us to note, especially when we see in what's happening in other parts of the continent, was that we were interfaith and ecumenical in character. There was cooperation amongst the Christians, Muslims, African traditional religion, those who were of the Hindu faith and others. There was also interdenominationalism that was happening. Organizations like INDAMASA, Interdenominational Ministers Fraternal, was very strong at that time. The South African prophetic movement was also ecumenical and multi-sectoral in its nature. The South African Council of Churches had developed into what we could consider to be the mother body, to which many of the other formations were either associated or were affiliated to the SACC. These formations included the South African Catholic Bishops' Conference, the Diaconia in KZN, the Young Christian Students, YCS, the Student Union for Christian Action, SUCA, PEXA, the Christian Anti-Racism Initiative, and the Institute for Contextual Theology, which was the champion of the Kairos document. These were established on the foundations of the then Christian Institute, which had been banned around the 1960s. The ICT, Institute of Contextual Theology, was formed in 1981 as an independent ecumenical entity to develop and promote contextual liberative theologies. And I say theologies in South Africa. Maybe we can talk about that later on. It was a member-based movement open to all progressive people of God that were anti the status quo at that time. It was independent from the institutional church. And this is important that sometimes when we talk about the role of the church in the struggle, sometimes it was not necessarily institutional church, but what we could consider in the language of past parachurch organizations that were also represented by different denominations. Its members, the ICT, were Christians who were motivated by their faith to participate in the struggle. This is very important, that whilst the struggle was socio-political in nature and economic, some of us who participated motivated, inspired, and driven by our faith. It included academics, ordained clergy, lay leaders, and ordinary Christian men and women, and youth. Armed with sharp theological tools, anchored in deep faith, soaked in deep spirituality, these members of ICT sought to negate the Christian theological foundations on which the philosophy and system of apartheid was based. ICT had chapters throughout the country, and it hosted conferences, seminars, and workshops on contextual and liberative theologies. The members of ICT were empowered on the tools and methodologies of doing contextual liberation theology. The Institute also commissioned the writing of prophetic theological articles and books. It contributed to journals of theology and so on. The ICT also was linked to such progressive international partners like the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologian, ITWOT, the acronym goes. And through ITWOT, I remember at our seminars and workshops, we used to have theologians who came from the Philippines, from Asia, from Latin America, who were able to participate with Black theologians who were coming from the US and somewhere else. Let me having provided that background, talk about the Kairos document itself, the structure of the document, because in the structure, we find the pillars and the essence and ethos of what this powerful document was about. The Kairos document was divided into 5 brief chapters, and I will touch. I don't mention them just in passings because, as I say, they are the DNA of what the Kairos document is all about. The first chapter was the moment of truth, critique of state theology, critique of church theology, and what was called towards a prophetic theology, and finally the challenge to action. The document, as I say, discerned that there were at that time 3 theologies that were operative in South Africa at that time. It was understood at that time that theology was a contested space. I remember there was a slogan that said the church as a site is a site of struggle. That when you go into the church and we get in the theologies, the sermons that were preached were contested, was a contest space. There were those who were using the Bible to maintain the status quo of oppression, using the Bible and using it to also to affirm our exploitation. And yet at the time, there were those who were inspired by the same Bible to be able to stand against their oppression and exploitation. The concept of Kairos, which is said to be the moment of truth, it's a theological and biblical concept that defined the time, the crisis moment in which South Africa found itself, in particular in 1985. The Kairos document described the Kairos as in this way. It says, for very many Christians in South Africa, this is the Kairos, the moment of grace and opportunity, the favorable time in which God issues a challenge to decisive action. It is a dangerous time because if this opportunity is missed and allowed to pass by, the loss for the church, the loss for the gospel, and for all the people of South Africa will be immeasurable. In other words, it was an invitation that it is now or never. This is the moment. Whilst it was political, from a spiritual and a theological and a Christian faith perspective, that it was a God moment. It was God's favorable time and a moment of truth. You either seized the moment or missed it, and the impact of missing it, the Kairos document argued, would be immeasurable. It was a moment of opportunity and of grace. And therefore, it was also a moment of decisive action. It was not just about theorizing. It was about, and as I say this, Slalo and friends who are here, we need, as we develop a Kairos consciousness, continue to be asking ourselves the question, have we experienced such moment post-1985? Have we experienced such moment, God moment, where that were pregnant with crisis, even after 1994, if we are to develop this consciousness? The Kairos document critiqued, and I say also, let us look at where we are, what he called state theology. State theology was understood as the theology of co-option, that the government and the regime of the time was using theology to co-opt Christian believers. And the document stated, simply, the theological justification of the status quo with its racism, capitalism, and totalitarianism, it blesses injustice, it canonizes the will of the powerful and reduces the poor to passivity, obedience, and apathy. In other words, those who fed this theology said, we are where we are because it is God's will. We are where we are, and the Afrikaners or the white people in general were the elect. They had been chosen by God to be the ones who model to us what it means to be the people of God. And it used the Romans chapter 13 that called on people to respect governments because they were ordained of God, including the illegitimate apartheid government. The church of the state theology provided chaplains that went to fortify the government security system to repress the people in the pretense of law and order. Whether they were the SAP of that time or the SADF of that time, they had chaplains, and their responsibility was to feed these soldiers and police and other formations of the state with theologies that made them believe that they were serving God in pushing apartheid. Many churches, especially the Dutch Reformed Church, your own alma mater, Stellenbosch, Tuks, and others, whether it is the University of Free State, became laboratories of theologies that supported the apartheid system and defended it. They were even resourced for that. The second theology that was critiqued was the church theology. That whilst there is the state theology that is propagated by the state out there, the church, especially the institutional church, had its own default theology that it was developing. This theology was found to be superficial and very cautious as executed and communicated through denominational leaders and the statements, the resolutions that were passed, that the resolution, the conference floors were also sites of struggle. But most of the time, because people were afraid, they brought in a theology that is accommodative in nature. It used general theological statements and generic doctrinal positions in a context that was volatile, but they were not contextualized. They were not applied to the situations. You find theologies that were just generic. As for us as Methodists, it would be a theology that applies here in South Africa and generally anywhere in the world without saying what is the context in which a particular congregation or a community of faith finds itself. The Kairos document identified 4 concepts through which it demonstrated this point of church theology. The first one was reconciliation, that the church advanced reconciliation that did not want to address the status quo of what is it that brought conflict and disharmony. As we saw through the TRC, there was this rush for reconciliation without talking about remorse, without talking about reparation, without talking about issues of justice. The second concept that the Kairos document identified was of justice, that here justice was located just on the individual. Just as with reconciliation, the focus was on individuals, that if an individual white person could repent and we go and we deal with them individually, would be able to change and defeat apartheid. It did not choose to look at powerful systems. It didn't look at structures and powers that were operative, that made us to be oppressed and to make us as Black majority to be exploited and as poor as we were. Then there was the issue of nonviolence, that it talked about nonviolence generally, and this nonviolence and peace was more what theologians of the time called the Pax Romana, Roman peace. This is peace that was merely the absence of war and did not deal with the material conditions that led to the conflict, as I've alluded. Having critiqued the Kairos document, then advocated for a prophetic theology, and the charter says towards a prophetic theology, which understood that this was an ongoing, unfolding, dynamic movement of prophetic theology. The Kairos theologians advocated for this as a biblical, spiritual, pastoral, and above all, a prophetic response to the system of apartheid at that time. It called on Christians to use tools of social analysis as the bedrock of doing this theology. It talked about the importance of reading the signs of the time, as quoted in Matthew 16, verse 3, that when you are a Christian, you are called to look at the signs of the times and ask, what is it that God is calling us in the spirit, in the culture, in the ethos of the prophets of the Old Testament? What is it that we must respond to? The Bible became the source to identify the challenges of oppression and how God, especially in the Exodus became the framework that was used at that time. And as we looked at the Exodus, we understood this incarnational God, that we have a God who is able to live in, quotes, the luxury of heaven, to come to where the people found themselves, the trenches, the pain, the suffering in which they found. And God came down and became part of the people in their own struggles, rather than remote controlling them from a distance. Luke 4:18, drawn from Isaiah, the manifesto of Jesus, became another inspirational focus. The one that said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, that's anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to the oppressed, to those who are economically exploited. And so the prophetic theology was anchored in this Christ who was the hope of the world. And that is what we were to preach, to teach, and to mobilize God's people around. But the Kairos document did not only end there. It noted that it is not adequate, and this is important even in today, that to just have platforms and forums where we talk without being involved, without participating in the community struggles in which God's people found themselves then, and even today, if we develop Kairos consciousness, is not adequate. The Kairos document called on Christians to move from the pie in the sky theologies that distance us from the pain and struggles of the people. There used to be those hymns, I remember in the Free State, it taught us that we are just passers-by. Let us not worry about the oppression that we are experiencing, that there will be freedom in the world after. We were called through the document to participate in the struggle and to identify with this God who identified and was on the side of the people. The theological concept of preferential option for the poor was a powerful, that our God was not a God who was neutral, the God who stands on the fence. And as the document, the Kairos document said, our God is a God who does not get in neutral when there is Moses and Pharaoh on the one side and the other, that it identified with Moses and Moses' cause. Individual Christians were therefore called to participate in mass popular struggles of the people. Churches were called to transform their programs, whether it is confirmation, whether it is youth programs, whether it is our services, the sermons that we were preaching were called to be liberative in disposition. Let me just quickly say that the one thing about the Kairos document, and I'm going to mention this quickly so that we can go into conversation, is that it produced and ignited and influenced other further documents that I advise that in the future you must consider hosting people to talk about them. The first one was what was called the Evangelical Witness in South Africa. This was a document that was produced by consent evangelicals, those that we call charismatic and Pentecostal, who were critiquing themselves and say, in the light of the Kairos document, where are we? Because we are conservative, we are not identifying with the popular, and it is a response to that. There was another one called the Kairos that was, the road to Damascus and conversion. This was a collaboration of about 7 countries' theologians: South Africa, Namibia, South Korea, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Guatemala. That way, reflecting now at an international level, upping the game, accentuating the program of the Kairos to an international level, and saying, we people of the world, especially in the South, or third world countries as they were called at that time, have common struggles of imperialism, of colonialism, and its impact. And it is important for us to cooperate. The Kairos document further inspired the development of other Kairos documents in the world. There was what was called the Kenya Kairos. There was the European Kairos document, the Zimbabwean Kairos document, Kairos India, the American Kairos, and the one that some of us have participated in, the Palestinian Kairos document. And recently is the Kairos from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Our own Reverend Mike Foster participated in the facilitation of the development of the Kairos document, reflecting on the pains and the struggle of the people in the DRC. As we know, the violence there is a violence around scavenging on the mineral resources of that country. Later on in South Africa in 2011, they came up what is called the Kairos Southern Africa, an organization that was launched to carry forward the legacy of the Kairos theology in Southern Africa and to be in solidarity with others throughout the world. And the Reverend Edwin Erison, who is there in the Cape, an Anglican priest, is the secretary of Kairos South Africa. Around 2012, it reflected on what was happening in South Africa, on what the African National Congress as the ruling party was doing, the level of corruption, factionalism, and saying to the ruling party, all that you are about is impacting on us as South Africans, even those of us who are not your members. And it was rejected by the ruling party. Those who got involved were mocked. But when we look at what is happening in our country today, we will see how apt it is important. In conclusion, I want to point out that a few of us have started an initiative to revive the ICT, the champion of the Kairos document. There's a group of us who came together 2 weeks ago and launched a seminar where we invited Professor Alan Busak and others to engage in theologies in the spirit and ethos of ICT. And we agreed, we seek not to be nostalgic. We seek not to replicate what was said and done in those days, that we are about reviving more the ethos and the consciousness of Kairos. We are about rediscovering the tools of theology that were used then and apply them in today's context. It is also about us identifying a new agenda of issues that are facing society today. And in the spirit of the Kairos document, these are things that must be discerned and identified by a movement of progressive thinking people rather than individuals. And so wherever there is this culture and ethos, we need to always say, what is our discernment? What is the particular context of crisis? And what are the conditions that should lead to what we have identified to be a Kairos? What is this discernment? And this discernment must not always come from academic, but must be bottom-up process where even ordinary men and women who are not technical theologians should participate. It is true Kairos is one that listens seriously to what God is saying at a particular movement. It must respond to the socio-political challenges and not spiritualize as state theology would do, the material conditions in which God's people find themselves. I thank you.
If we were in a hall, this is when everybody clapped, you know, because you have given such an extensive submission of what the Kairos document is. But Muruti, can we please start from the beginning? But before we enter into this conversation, may I please implore with everybody that is on the Zoom to please mute yourselves, because if you do not mute yourself, we are going to have to remove you from the Zoom channel because you are disturbing the conversation, and people who are watching us from the Facebook page are not able to hear what our guest is actually submitting to us today. So Muruti, I'm by no means a theologian, but let us maybe start by unpacking the definition of Kairos. You said it is the right, my knowledge says it is the right, critical, and opportune moment. Like it is that moment that is so opportune that it is also very critical. And you spoke about the fact that this document was drafted in 1985. And my memory says, I'm reminded by the state of emergency that was happening in 1985 in South Africa. So have we reached the existence of the true existence that this particular document wanted to reach? Or are we continuing to miss the Kairos moment?
One of the things that the Kairos document said was that it is not a concluded document. In other words, it is not like the canon of the Bible. You know, when the Bible was composed, we were told from Genesis up to Exodus, you can't come now and say, there is one more point that we want to add to increase the Bible. The Kairos document said it is a dynamic, open moment because our God is not a God who comes once, that God continues to reveal God's self at opportune crisis moments. And that is why, if you look at what I said, that there were other Kairos moments that were identified in Palestine, in Latin America, in India, because people said, even in our context, God must be talking at particular moments. But further on, that is why, Slalo, we talk about the consciousness, the Kairos consciousness, is that even in the communities where we are, we need to be looking at opportunities. But if you ask me about the document itself in the manner in which it is, I started by giving the historical background and the network of organizations and formations that executed our struggle. That you can't look at the Kairos document on its own, that there were many players and organizations, whether they were in quote secular, political, whether they were economic in different sectors, our struggles was integrated. And that is why we always warn and call to order those who claim to be our liberators, those who say they are the ones who executed the struggle alone, because this struggle was a mass popular struggle. And the Kairos document contributed to our freedom and our liberation. That is why some of us claim this liberation, not as a gift from others, but as a contribution, a product of all of us. And so it has contributed into that. But to be specific, all of us needs, and that's why I also use the word discern, that we need to be using our spiritual eyes, our spiritual ears, listen with hearts, where God gives God's self opportunities for us to, and that's why I also use the word invitational, that God continues to invite us to participate in God's own program. And that is what we mean by salvation history. That when you look back at our history and our freedom, we will say, well, others will write a secular history. We as Christians will call it salvation history and say at its heart was a God who participated and we came alongside that God to bring this freedom.
Sure. Thank you so much. You said when you were explaining the crux or the genesis of the Kairos document, that it was a theological response for a political situation that we found ourselves in. Do you think there is a need now, today, in South Africa for that response, for that theological response to the current political situation that we find ourselves in?
Let me go just a little bit, and so that I strengthen the point when I said it was a political a response to a political situation. We must remember, we called apartheid a system, and that little word system again talked about the multi-layered nature of apartheid. That politics was also spiritual in nature. They targeted our hearts and our minds. I remember there used to be programs of what was called the low intensity conflict, where they did camps and took young people to go and indoctrinate them, even with spiritual things. So it was multi-layered. And so that's important for me to say. If you talk about today, look at what is on our agenda. Look at our headlines from the media. Look at the bad news that we continue to receive. Look at the agenda and the program, the struggle of what is happening at the so-called Zondo Commission that is about state capture. The stories that we are hearing there. The people who are messing up our country are doing this with impunity. They do it with impunity. They are even claiming to be our liberators, young people who, as dynasties, have messed up our country, are telling us we must not worry. They are going to run for presidency of organizations to come and liberate us from the mess that they have caused. And we have an option. Are we going to be idle by Lucas? Are we going to be those who are just recipients of others' false benevolence, or in the spirit of active citizenry? We are going to find spaces and platforms and opportunities where we can participate and respond to the moment to which God is calling us. And I believe even at this moment, we are in a crisis moment. There are people who are saying South Africa is on the brink of becoming a failed state. There are people who have described South Africa as a predator, those who are leading us as predators, who are doing and have looted our country with impunity. Those of us who had a humble contribution during that time did not believe that South Africa would be what it is. We were so proud of our struggle and our freedom, and we have been proven wrong. And it is also up to us now to correct the mess that South Africa finds itself in. And we do this as Christians, drawing from our spiritual resources, using and knowing that God is on our side.
Yeah, sure. Again, you also mentioned that this document is an interfaith and it is interfaith and ecumenical in nature. It is also interdenominational in nature. But then you say it was independent from institutional church. What does that mean?
All right, let me just, I spoke about the prophetic movement and saying we were also participating. I mean, if you think of the 80s, I can remember the twins of our struggle. Excuse me. Reverend Alan Busak in Cape Town with Mulana Farid Isaac, who are both today professors of theology. One theologian a Christian theologian, the other Muslim theologian. And we participated. But the document itself was membership-based. And the point I was making is that the theologians who participated in the development and formulation of the Kairos document came from different denominations. It is not the Methodist Church official that came and participated. You find Methodists, individual theologians and clergy and lay people who participated there. Some of the friends, some of whom are in this platform, Zoom platform, and others I know are following on Facebook, are people that I met through the SACC youth programs. We were part of what was called the IYY, the International Year of Youth, and we came and we knew each other slightly, even before we were theologians. I always say this, because some of us learned theology. We read Gustavo Gutierrez, James Cone, and other eminent theologians before we even went to theological schools and seminaries, because that is how the struggle was executed. It was not a matter of theology is a exclusive domain of those who are ordained and qualified. The ICT opened it up to ordinary theologians and to ordinary people to participate.
Yeah, I actually like that point, because part of your submission, you said that everybody could be a member of this, let's call it an institution, for lack of a better word, because you said there were clergy, there were lay leaders, there was a youth, you know, there were academics, and there were just normal people like Bosilaelo, you know, were part of that movement. Isn't that what we need now, today, in order also to talk to the contextual liberation of us today?
This is what we are attempting to do, to join forces. I spoke about Southern Africa, Kairos, that Edwin Ersin is leading. I spoke about us reviving the Institute for Contextual Theology. And as I said, and I repeat, we seek not to be nostalgic, but we want to be like this Sankofa bird that looks back and say, what are the things that shaped and molded us? How do we reappropriate them for the new context? But also, how do we give space for new voices, for young people, theologians, and ordinary members? That's why some of us agree to participate in forums like this. And the intention is that our seminaries, you know, when we were at seminary, we sought to integrate, because sometimes seminaries, they represent the denominations, they teach the doctrines and whatever. There were theologies that we called extracurricular theologies that we found outside formal institutions, but we were able to bring them into our scripts, into our assignments, into our ministry. And so when you talk about Sidwell Mohotu, the impact of Kairos consciousness, contextual theology, has to be demonstrated in the corner when I was stationed in Venda, in rural area. The question is, am I schizophrenic? Am I progressive out there and become conservative in the church? Or am I able to integrate that ethos in my day-to-day life as I lead people and the sermons that I preach? And so I believe that is needed today. We still need to say, is there a new state theology? These people that we were comrades with in the trenches, is there a way that they are expecting us as Christians to behave? Because I've heard people, the same progressive liberation government, revoking Romans 13. We were told we are church, go to church, leave politics out. You can't participate here. This is rough. This is ugly. It is not for the faint-hearted. And so we are supposed to.
You are muted, Ruth.
I'm told the host muted me. So then we need to ask ourselves around the kind of church that we have today, the institutional church. How progressive, how open, how engaging. And at our seminar last time, there were people who were challenging us. Our own mathematics were asking us whether, as we seek to reestablish and revive ICT, are we open to the radical voice of young people? Or are we going to be gatekeepers? And we need to be reflecting. And truth is, as we used to say, freedom is never given on a platter. You need people who challenge and open, who push boundaries so that we can hear new voices. Because we ourselves can claim that we think we are progressive, but it's possible that we can find ourselves stuck in the past. And so we need to hear new voices and as contributed by young people.
Yeah, Moruti, I would love for us to take questions and comments from people. Let me start with some of the comments on the Zoom platform, and I'm not going to be reading people who are singing your praises. Desmond Lesejane says, "Itwat," he was explaining that it is Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians. I saw, there you go. Telela Vika says, what are the examples of the three theology states, church and prophetic theologies in contemporary South Africa? Moruti Molo is saying, what are the clear continuities and discontinuous about the church as beholden by the state theology and church theology? And what are the signs of prophetic witness that can be seen as public prophetic theology? So if you can just maybe address those three questions for us.
Can you believe that these are the guys that I've asked who come from that tradition, who I thought will be comrades in the struggle together, and they are throwing these at me. Those people.
I was actually hoping that you would put them on blast so that some of them can answer these very questions, because I know that some of them know the answers.
I think so. I mean, Desmond Lesejane, the one who explained it, what is part of the core team of ICT. Molo is part of it. Moji Pataki are here. But the question from Sis Telela, I think I've attempted when I spoke about how the present government seeks to execute state, because she's asking about three theologies in our contemporary situation. It is what government. Look at what they do whenever there are elections. Look at how they're going to flock all political parties, going to flock our churches, look for platforms to seek there, and our responsibility is to legitimize them and give them platform. But when we want to engage them in the programs that they are post-elections, we are told politics is not and our space. And there are many of us, I don't know, who get paralyzed when they see politicians. Maybe they see liberators, as they call themselves. The church theology, some of us, there are comrades who have told me I'm part of the institution, I'm part of the gatekeepers, and they are watching me. And it is about, if you talk the Methodist Church, what are the agendas? How do we open up for women? How do we create space? The 40-40-20 is a prophetic kairos moment. It's not a number thing. There is a particular outcome, progressive prophetic outcome that it is a tactic. It's not a strategy, it's a tactic. It is something that is short-term, meant to deliver an outcome that may be permanent. I deliberately said we together must discern what the new theologies are. I know, for instance, that the issues around gender are part of what we need to be engaging. And some of these colleagues are involved in NGOs. One of us, Bafana Khumalo, is founder of Sonke Gender Justice. And how do we bring those into the church and bring the theologians, and not just bring NGO raw thinking, but be able to theologize within ourselves. The issues around LGBTI, QA plus is something that we are doing. We in the Limpopo Synod, the clergy met last week to draw an agenda of prophetic issues that we are going to take up in the next few weeks. Next week, we are starting with issues of human sexuality and gender identity and diversity. And we have invited people from IAM to come and participate. IAM is the Inclusive Affirming Ministries. Henslin Davids and Tulim Jwaha and the other foundation, Tebogo Class, would be addressing us. We have agreed we are going to deal with what we call elephants in the room conversations around race, around issues of land. We are going, and we agreed there is nothing that is holy cow in Limpopo. And so we need to talk. And if we need to make ourselves uncomfortable, we'll make ourselves uncomfortable. We are going to talk about issues of geographic circuits. We're going to talk about whiteness and how it is dominating the Methodist Church. Because sometimes when we go to the forums of the conferences of the church, there is some programming that the institutional church and the dominant culture molds you to engage with issues. So that is that. But as for prophetic, I know there's a lot of revival that is happening. The South African Council of Churches is championing a lot of programs today, and we are coming alongside them as local fraternals through what they call the local ecumenical action networks to come alongside. And all of us are called to participate in these initiatives.
Yeah, thank you so much.
There was the question about continuities and discontinuities. The continuities for me is the ethos. What is the culture? What are the tools? What are the things? That's what I call the variables. What is it that we are carrying forward that we must not lose from where we come from? But also, what are the things that have run their course that we need to leave behind because we have moved on? And those are the things that we will continue to identify as we move forward. The issues of creation, for instance, were not issues that we dealt with. Mantema made us aware that these are the things that we need to deal with. They are progressive. The issue of carrying climate change and so on. Those are the issues of the moment that we need to equip ourselves. South Africans, I've said, are generally political. We are very poor on issues of economic rights and economic justice. We are not equipped. We are just political. But the new struggle is around understanding economics, even at an international level.
Yeah.
But it's the terrain in which we must find ourselves.
But Muruti, even as the church, shouldn't we enforce these types of teachings also within schools? Because sometimes by the time we are at our ages, you and I are the same age. So by the time we are at our ages, it's a bit late. So shouldn't we start these children and South Africans at an earlier age? Shouldn't we even change the landscape of South African education? Because right now it does not seem to be serving even South Africa itself.
I'll keep on evoking the names of, because what we do, there are two tactical approaches, Slide. One is that there are those of us who believe and accept that South Africa is a secular state, and we respect that as Christians. I know there are Christians who are angry, they are crying for that space, as if government needs to treat us differently. But if you want to talk about children, our children ministry, what used to be called Sunday schools, is what we have access to. I believe that if Sidwal Mohotu and many others who are in this kind of theology preach, and there are teachers who are sitting in our pews and they hear sermons that are progressive and so on. And they move from here and they go into the classrooms to be teachers. They will be able to impart these values. That's number one. But then you find those, and that is why even we as the church, when we worked and participated with trade unions that time, we were comrades together. We interacted in different platforms. There were things that brought us together. We cross-pollinated. It was not silos. And that is what we need to find. Where they influence us with theories and tools. Dare I say, sometimes at that time that used to be Marxist. That's why you have people like Musala, Itumele Musala Prof, who is a Black theologian, who uses Marxist tools of, because he interacted through the Black consciousness movement and cross-pollinated. And you find ordinary BC members who understood the Black theology because they interacted. And so that is what we need to do. But I know the schools are contested. Desmond Lesejane, who commented, works for a program that does work in schools. And he's a theologian. And he has taken his own struggles in the education sector. Mauji Pataki is in the issues of ethical leadership. He's running a foundation. There are people like Sis Noma Belu, who was in diaconia. There are people who are running, we have our own Nancy Heron, who was the last woman standing for ICT. She was responsible for folding the ICT and take it to the archives at the Wits University. And so if we want to ask about, and Nancy is not an ordained minister, but she grew up in the progressive ecumenical movement. And there are many such theologians. And we look at ourselves as theologians without the collar. All of us are theologians in our own right.
Priesthood of all believers.
Yeah.
I need to take a few questions because I'm also looking at the time. Some of the people actually are asking for access to the Kairos document. You know, they're asking where can they find the document. Kaugelo is saying, perusing the theological literature during South Africa's post-apartheid era, Kairos theology as a brand of liberation theology does not appear to feature significantly in contributing to a liberation theology of our democratic society. Perhaps I could phrase it as such. Kairos theology was important for the common good in the quest for the liberation in the struggle against apartheid, but is arguably found greatly wanting in its resourcefulness for the public good in the quest for reconstruction and transformation in contemporary struggles. The rebirth of Kairos theology, maybe, I think you've said that, you call it the revival. How do we go about that? Because we need today in a post-democracy now more than ever before.
If you listen to you'll think that these are cliches or I'm repeating myself. If you listen to what I kept on talking about, culture, ethos, movement, consciousness, because even as we start ICT, want to revive it. This kind of progressive liberatory theologies are not locked in one organization. It needs to proliferate even in our seminaries and over. And that is why the concept of a movement is important. You know, I said I did theology before I was this thing. I was a member of the Wesley Guild.
I know.
I was an ICT and a member of the Wesley Guild. And we made sure that if you go to Itsoseng, Lichtenberg, where I later grew up in, our Wesley Guild was problematic. Its members appeared in court from time to time. because of what we were doing outside. And so all I'm saying is that let it not be hoarded or held by a few, but let it be a movement. And these things that we are trying to do are attempts to do that. But I also want to give space to other people who may respond to some of these questions. And I've mentioned certain names, but they are not the only names that who must respond to this. Sizondo Akutu is not here. She was one of the members of ICT. Yeah, but there are people who may make comments and contributions here.
Yes. And Tata Sejane is saying, we must remember that the institutional church in the main rejected the Kairos document, including section of the academy. To what extent can we expect the church to embrace prophetic theology? How does one seeking to be part of the prophetic movement live with the tension? And that was partly going to be my question about how do we embrace prophetic theology today? And as part of your conclusion, you spoke about we need a process of discernment. We need to discern in terms of where we go, where we take the Kairos document forward and how we do that. So I think that the listener is talking the same language as I am. How do we live with the tension? Because it does create tension.
Oh, we have lived with that tension. I don't know. If I tell people that we respect some of the claims that are made by institutional church, some of the people that we claim, whether you talk in the Methodist Church, Kozam Gojo, whether you talk Musala, you talk Dr. Kubule, you talk, those were individuals who participated in the ecumenical movement outside, but their thinking was not as warmly accepted as we claim them post when we look back on hindsight. The same with Archbishop Tutu. When Archbishop Tutu was appointed the secretary of the SACC, and when he became Bishop of Johannesburg and later on Archbishop, there are Anglicans who left. It was not easy. It was not an easy ride. They may claim him today, and we respect that he's an Anglican, but the claim was not as warm as we do looking back. Yeah. I can go to the Apostolic Faith Mission. Frank Chikani was, when the ICT took him to be secretary of the institute, he had been, I don't know what term, I want to be gentle with that, but he had been chucked out of the Apostolic Faith Mission. Today, he is the president of the denomination's international body. But when he was let out, the ICT, the ecumenical movement received him, became secretary of ICT following Dr. Tema, and he went on to become secretary of the SACC. Father Mkachwa was secretary of the South African Catholic Bishops' Conference and became secretary of ICT. Our own Wesley Mabuza became the secretary of ICT. But we can look at how affirming was the Methodist Church to Wesley Mabuza. It's a question mark. And so we live with tensions. We live with tensions. When you have the conviction of your beliefs, you continue to do that without contradicting what your church stands for. The theologies of our, whether it's Luther in the Lutheran Church, whether it's Wesley, as in we need to even reappropriate Wesley for Southern Africa, for Africa, for nations of the world. He can't be locked in a museum in England somewhere and become this untouchable, and we don't make Wesley respond to the context in which we are today. That is what contextual means, and that is what liberative means.
But isn't that also, isn't the answer to Dadeli Sejane's question in your opening statement when you said members were Christians motivated by faith? Shouldn't we go back to what our faith is and what our faith stands for? Then that's where we find the response to say, how do we now move forward, and what guides us and what motivates us?
At all times, that is our point of departure. We are inspired. We may use the tools, but we are inspired. That's why I spoke about history and salvation history. Our lenses, our interpretation. But those of us who are, for instance, practical theologians will tell you that our theology needs to be integrated. We borrow from social scientists, we borrow from economics, we borrow from psychology. For us to understand communities, you must study sociology for you to be able to. And so we integrate and say, where do we discern God's voice here? What is it that God is saying?
Yeah.
I've also noted that there is a Benima Beba who is also making contributions.
What is wrong with your sound? You keep on, it keeps on dying. I would love to actually, because Reverend Molo is so invested in the conversation, I would love for him to answer this question. The Kairos the Kairos by then was challenging the National Party government system, the apartheid system. Most of the mainline churches today are still part of the problem of the system, which is still upholding the same system of discrimination. How can the Kairos institution assist us or assist our churches, which still upholds those systems? And really, the same system, you said yourself, there were some people who were using the Bible to oppress others and exclude them. And then the ICT used the same Bible to fight against, or to liberate themselves against the same oppression and exclusion. So how now, his question is, how now do we change the same church? Because the Bible has not changed. Muriti Mol.
Yeah, that's good.
Hello.
How are you, Muriti?
Okay.
I'm good, thank you. Please help us. How do we liberate this church, which still lives by the old apartheid and discrimination laws? And we know even with leadership positions or people in position, we still use the same laws that governed us those many years ago. So how do we liberate the church?
Okay, sorry, I enjoyed typing, not speaking. Okay, the first thing I want to say, we need to be very careful of oversimplifying the notion of church to the point that we think church is a homogeneous universal institution that always speaks with one voice. The church is never that.
Yeah.
The church, the bishop indicated that, but I want to amplify that. The church is always living in a contested space. Those in power need the church. Those without power needs the church. Because the church is needed as a justifier of power dynamics, it is always something that will be contested forever and ever. And therefore, this whole romanticized idea that we have, that one day the church will become universally prophetic, is a misnomer. It has never existed in history. Jesus Christ stands in the tradition that is anti the Jerusalem temple tradition that has found itself as an expression of the empire tradition that comes with Rome. That's why the connection between Rome and Judaism to kill Jesus is easy to connect. But he stands geographically. Galilee is not simply a geographical space, but is a space of different imaginations that call for a different way of being temple, of being church, and of being society. So even in our own scriptures, if you go back, if we liberate ourselves from this Moses tradition, where Moses stands for the Israelites who are eternally good and against those who are from Pharaoh, we get into the real nuance that comes through the prophetic tradition. And that nuance is simply this: the fact that we were all in the same struggle does not mean we carry the same idea of God. It does not mean we carry the same ideas or values that we thought we shared when we fought a common enemy. And therefore, the tradition, the prophetic tradition, stands in tension with what is called the palace tradition, which was in control of the temple and of Jerusalem. You can go then to Jesus. You can go then to the apostles. You can go then to Constantine. You can go to the church in Germany. You can go to the church before the Second World War. You can go to the church in America before the anti-slavery movement. You can go to Wesley. As much as we enjoy Wesley, there's a serious critique that we need to put on Wesley, as Wesley understanding of sin as a describer of people who are different than him. And that created this ability for a civilization process that took us to this place where Black Africans were perceived as people lacking of civilization because we were perceived as sinners, located in what Wesley called sin. So all of those things created the reality that we have lived in tension between those who want to use the church as a justifier of their powerful positions. I can go further and talk about men, how they use faith now to justify their own position of power. So we always live in that tension. So we must not sit here and think to ourselves, this church will be liberated totally and the church will become free. Those who are prophetic inclination must work very hard to contest the church every step of the way. And that contestation is never ending. It is one that seeks to liberate and therefore calls upon us who might rise into power. Bishop Mkhotu, who is now part of the institution, will have to grapple with what it means to be in a powerful position in a stationing committee that allows him to use that power as a service to the church, as a service to a local community. And he must grapple, therefore, with what it means to serve the institution that needs to govern its discipline, its sense of direction, but bringing it to a deeply strenuous position of being institutional and prophetic. Those are realities. So this fallacy of us thinking that somebody is going to give us a church that is prophetic is a fallacy. We have to sit down and work very hard and contest that space. And that means using spaces like this. That means contesting the curriculum at seminaries. Going back to what Bishop says, the intersections of society, church, and thinking. All those things Bishop has spoken about are our tools. Therefore, let us not gear ourselves for the panacea. Let's gear ourselves for hard work. And when we work hard, then the voices of the prophetic will become witnesses that are more vocal than the conservative ones.
Sure. Such hard truth, though. Because, you know, when we come to church, a lot of people think they come to church where there has to be unity all the time. And what you're alluding to, Reverend Molo, is the truth of the church. And that is why there has always been separations. You know, this one church separates from the Catholic Church, then it separates from the Anglican Church, then it separates from the Lutheran Church, because of all of these, because of the dysnorma that exists, and because of the differences that exist. Now, as part of our closing, I want us to be done by 7:30 so that I am not too much off. Muruti Mkhotu, you said earlier on that the clergy in the Limpopo Synod, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I think there's something there for us to learn. clergy met in order to talk about the white elephants within the church, what we discontinue and what we take forward. Isn't that also part of the problem? The fact that only clergy met, when you could have involved other people, you could have involved some lay people, you could have involved the youth, just as the Kairos document has been like. Shouldn't that probably be a problem for the church today?
Thank you. By the way, I want to affirm Mike Foster, who's here, and if you, in your way towards 7:30, you could give him a minute if he's around to talk about Kairos DRC from the Congo. Look.
And that is, so pardon me, Muruti. And what's his name, if I may ask?
No, Reverend Mike Foster. Mike Foster.
Oh, is he online? Okay.
Ecumenical. Yeah.
Okay.
Look, I was making an example, and I didn't have an example. By the way, the program of the clergy conversation does not come from the bishop. It's generated again by the collective. And I was just mentioning it as an example, and I know there are other people who've got other initiatives somewhere. And even in KZN, where Mike Foster is involved, outside the Methodist Church. The conversations we are having are not exclusive to us, but we meet. We meet as clergy because we have a common agenda as clergy. That is not exclusive to other people. We need to, our clergy conversations are like a staff room. If teachers meet in a staff room, it's like staff. We meet to encourage each other, to support each other, to challenge each other, to become better people, to strengthen, and so on. And the hope is, if Lwazi Kondlo is seated there amongst us, and we have these conversations, they shape him as the coordinator of the children's and youth ministry, to be able to take that thinking. If there is the president of the YMG who's participating there, we hope the consciousness is growing and developing to be able to go there. We hope as we engage there, we are able to, ministers are able to go to the quarterly meetings with the thinking, and these conversations shape their preaching, that they will go and investigate further and so on. That is the idea, that we are here to empower each other. My favorite phrase is, we are gathered to be scattered. So we gather in order to be empowered, and then we get scattered in our circuits, in the organizations we lead, and the synods we chair, and so on. And so if you ask Sidwell Mohotu, you will say, what is the agenda of your synod gathering? To see whether that thinking is taken further into that space, and so on. So that is what is important.
Yeah, I think we can really allow Reverend Mike Foster an opportunity to talk to us about Kairos DRC, and also maybe see if we have some similarities between South Africa and the DRC. Reverend Mike?
Yeah, I'm looking all blue there, so I'm just going to switch my thing off. Hi, Selelo, and greetings to everyone. Yes, yeah, I mean, you've kind of put me on the spot, but just to give a broad thing, that Kairos South Africa has genuinely inspired and spawned many other Kairoses globally. You know, there's Kairos Palestine and so on. And more recently, Kairos Democratic Republic of Congo, a group of people have sat down and they have produced a document as well. And it's again using the same methodology of very critical see, judge, act, and very critical interrogation of the DRC. Now, just briefly to say that between 1994 to current day, more than 12 million, listen to this very carefully, more than 12 million DRC compatriots have died, been killed. And so we often don't even mention that. And basically it just speaks to the fact that African lives don't matter. You get 2 or 3 South Africans killed in Cabo Delgado, and it hits the headlines. And then there's 2,600 African Mozambican compatriots, and we don't pay attention. And so Kairos, as the church, needs to speak into those situations, but not only speak into those situations, needs to have a plan of action. So our work at the moment is that we are doing what we call, we're working with refugees, but we feel that it's not just a case of working sort of in a welfare way with refugees, but to actually work with the country of origin, to enable and empower churches together with the churches there to say that what affects the DRC affects South Africa. And just to say very briefly that our vision of a Christ-healed Africa for healing and transformation, I would say that a Christ-healed DRC for the healing and transformation of Africa, because it is the wealthiest bit of real estate almost on the planet, you know, whatever thing, and yet it is the most contested and the people are the poorest. So just very briefly that the Kairos South Africa has genuinely over the last 35 years or so spawned many other Kairos and inspired people and has mobilized churches, but we will always be a remnant. You won't get the whole church on board. I think we need to be realistic. You know, there will be a remnant of keen activists and prophets. And I think that's always been the trend, even if you go back to Old Testament times. And maybe just one last comment is that I heard, you know, what Bishop Molo, maybe that's a prophecy. Reverend Molo, yeah, what Reverend Molo said about the, I think we've got to recognize that, that they are contesting themes. That there are contesting themes even within the scriptures. There are those who can prove slavery from scriptures and those who can prove anti-slavery from scriptures. And that has often divided the church, you know, and that's why we do need trained theologians, trained people to actually help us read the Bible properly. And I think that's often the problem is the whole hermeneutics and interpretation of the Bible. So, you know, just to perhaps conclude on that, because I don't want to go over time. I see it's 7:29. So thanks very much just for the space to speak a little bit about the DRC. Just to say that if you want to read the document, you can go to the KwaZulu-Natal Christian Council's website. The full DRC Kairos document is on there. So it's the KwaZulu-Natal Christian, just type that in, KwaZulu-Natal Christian Council. Remember, they're not council of churches, they're a Christian council. And then the document is available there. Thank you so much, Selelo. Nice to see you again. Okay.
So good to see you. I thought you were an avatar because it looks so blue on the screen. But Rev Mike, could you please, for purposes of people who are not on Zoom, could you please write for me on our chat where people should go so that I can also paste it on the Facebook page for other people who are on Facebook to be able to find it. There are two things that you said, and first of all, I'm so appalled at how Black people die and the world does not come to a standstill. But there are two things that you said that I would love for us to think about moving forward. One, you said we need a plan of action. It's all good and well to have the Kairos document, the document, but if we don't have a plan of action, we'll be talking about it after 5 years or 10 or 15 years, and we would not even know what we've done with it. And two, you said what affects the DRC affects South Africa, and that is the truth. You know, so we cannot separate ourselves from our African brothers and sisters or from other African states. So I'm so glad that this Kairos document has given birth and motivation for other Kairos documentation as well. Moruti Mokgoto, before I give you an opportunity to give your closing remarks, I just want to say that there are the four concepts that you spoke about, that you said the Kairos document addresses. And I felt like for those people who joined us late, just to quickly tell them what they are. One, you spoke about reconciliation without remorse and without reparation. It addressed justice. Again, focused on the individual instead of the system, talking about the apartheid system. You said it addressed non-violence, the Pax Romana. which I would have loved for us to talk about, because I do not know how far. You know, we just said we don't want war, but we still continue to live in a country that was unequal, so to speak. And the last one, you said that it advocates for prophetic theology, the use of tools for social justice, you know, for us to be able to read the signs of the time. And I think that's exactly what we need to discern on today as the church and as Christians, to be able to read the times of today. We can't have a government, Murudi, that builds houses with one door and one small window and think that's okay. Should there be a fire, those people, our people will continue to die and perish, and the world will continue and the country will still continue. Please, your parting shots.
My parting shot is we thank you for this invitation, for the conversation. In the spirit of the team that is trying to revive ICT, we do this as not as nostalgia. We do this to draw from past experience, to drink from the wells. It's about opening the old wells so that we can find out what is it that can help us be prophetic in today. And no individual, my favorite phrase is, it's not like leadership, it's not about MacGyvers, it's not about individual stirrings and individual Moseses or Messiahs. It's about all of us participating and making a contribution. And as I say, even the example that Reverend Molo made, those of us who are in leadership, we depend on interacting with others, being challenged, being made uncomfortable. That is the only way even we will grow and hold hands together with the rest of us in changing the world. But let us remember, it is in the tradition of that great Galilean, the Lord Jesus Christ. It is in God's name that we do the work that we do. Otherwise, we will be doing our own agendas. That's all I want to say. And so I invite all of us to participate in the initiatives that are happening in the different sectors, whether it is around ecology. Our conversations are going to include that too. We need to be participating, whether it is an LGBTIQ+A, we need activists that we can field there, who can engage proper theologies and be able to help us, gender justice and so on. We must participate and make contributions. God bless you.
Oh, thank you so much. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank you for taking the invitation, because this platform is to do just that. This platform is a platform where we have conversations that we generally would not have when we're sitting in our pews, you know, in the church. These are conversations that we have in order to reach a larger group of people, to open people's minds, to unlock people's minds, to start thinking, for people to start thinking for themselves and the kind of church they want, the kind of society they would love to live in. There is a guy I follow on Facebook, Dr. Keenan Bridges. Today he said something like, and it's something similar to what Reverend Molo was saying, he said, Christianity and the church is not a convenience-based relationship, but it is a covenant-based relationship with God. And that is that, because when you're in a covenant with God, you know, life does not become easy. It's not just a bed of roses. You know, church, you don't go to church to be made comfortable. It becomes uncomfortable sometimes. And that is why people like you who are leaders, it is amazing that you accept to be made uncomfortable by people who enter into conversations with you. And we really thank God for you. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank each and every person who joined us on Zoom and who has participated. And even those that I've put on the spot, you know, you guys are such great leaders that you don't say no. And you've given us thought-provoking ideas to go home and start thinking about and being a part of the Kairos document. I would love for more young people and more lay people to be a part of the Kairos document, because this is the church that they would want and the society that they would love to live in. So thank you ever so much, Marie. And our friends on our Wesley Guild SA Facebook page, thank you so much for engaging with us and engaging with the topic today. I will post at the end of comments about where to find the Kairos DRC document. And Bishop, you have not told us where people can find the Kairos document.
Oh, I wanted to post the link, but I'm late now. But if they Google, it's there on Google.
Okay.
It's already available on Google. Just say Kairos document. You'll get it in PDF. It's
okay.
But there's another one with published by Ujamaa. Ujamaa Center is a theology center at UKZN. What I like about it, it has the other documents, from the other countries. It's a thick one. They compiled different ones. Not the DRC would be the recent, but they have got the others that came before.
Okay, we'll find it and then we can just share the link with everybody on Facebook, on our page. So thank you so much. And everybody who has joined us, thank you so much. And God bless you. Have a good evening. But before we close our conversation, may I please ask Reverend Molo to close for us with a prayer.
God, we thank you for this great moment of reflection and engagement. We trust that in your company, we have learned what it is to remain truthful to your presence, not only in word, but in praxis, so that this world is not a world for the powerful. It is not the world for those who usurp political power, but it is the world for those who are in the periphery, who live in the struggle, daily struggle of affirming life in the midst of death. And we who seek to be witnesses to that struggle, and therefore witnesses to your presence, may we be encouraged, dear God, not only by what we say, but by the witnesses of those who struggle daily with poverty, who struggle daily with exclusion, who struggle daily with racism, who struggle daily with dispossession, who struggle daily with God, with the world that dehumanizes them. And may we open not only, dear God, our thoughts and our ability to articulate, but our ability to hear them. And perhaps some moments simply be quiet so that they speak eloquently of the God that they know, not from the church, not even from the scriptures as we gave them, but for the God who reminds them daily what it is to believe in life when death is overwhelming. This we trust because, dear God, you are in those daily struggles with them. May we hear you as we listen to them. Through Christ our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Amen. Amen. And amen. Thank you, everybody. Good night, and God bless all of you.
Good night.
Yeah, good night. All the best.
Thank you. Good night, Mike. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.